Hi everybody, welcome to the show. Hi everybody, welcome back. My name is Amanda. This is Raising A to Z, our YouTube channel all about everything homeschooling for me, a former teacher turned homeschooler. And today we are talking about something that a lot of parents have concerns about. It's what do you do if you don't have enough space to homeschool? What if you are living in an apartment? What if you just have a small house? What do you do when you just don't have enough space when it comes to homeschooling? First off, I would say space is probably the least of your concerns. Having a small space does not mean that you don't have enough space. It just means you need to be a little bit more creative with your thinking. We recently did a video about our homeschool room and our activity room, as we call it. We'll put the link up here if you guys want to see that. And a lot of people assume that we have a very large house, that we have all this extra space, and that is not actually the case. We live in a nice small bungalow, and in order to have that homeschool space upstairs, we've actually had to make some sacrifices. So our kids actually share a room now, and they share quite a small room in order to have that space. And that was an option for us. That was an option we made because having the activity room on the main floor of our home provided us with a place to have toys, because we don't have something like that on our main floor. And so it was actually a solution to the constant mess that we were having. But it also ended up being a great option for us as homeschoolers, that we had this designated space that our kids can go and explore and create and do all those things in that space. But like I said, we had to be creative with our thinking. We had to, and also make a couple sacrifices that, to have this space where our kids can go and create whenever they wanted, we had to sacrifice the fact that they couldn't have two rooms. They couldn't each have their own room. And so that's, we had to be thinking outside the box to have that space, because most people would just assume we don't have the room for a homeschool room. And the truth of it is, actually, that's a really new addition for us. We've only had that homeschool room, that space available in that format since about May. And it's October now. Before that, we didn't have a room like that, and we were still homeschooling. We just used our dining room table. Before we had that, we have homeschooled at our dining room table, our coffee table, on the couch, on the floor, in the kitchen, like wherever we could find space and wanted to have a few moments, that is where we homeschooled. And I think especially once you get into homeschooling long term, it becomes a bit of a lifestyle, and so you aren't so confined to a room. Like, we do most of our book work in that room, but that is not where we do all of our learning. Actually, we do a very small part of our learning in that room. We learn all over our house and all over our space. But having a small space does mean you have to be a little bit more creative. And I heard something, I can't remember who said it. Someone had said that they had, all you need to homeschool is you need three places. You need a place to put your stuff, place to put the kids' stuff, and you need a place to put their materials. And if you can be creative with that and find room for those three things, you are set. You're golden. You have enough room to homeschool. Basically, and that's true. That's exactly what we have. Is we have a space where I put like my teacher's manuals, my homeschool books, anything that is like for me. I have a space where the kids have their books, and then the rest is just a place to organize their materials. So once you've kind of got your mind around that, it's fantastic, because it kind of helps you realize that you don't really need a lot of space. You just need to have ways to organize three things. I think a lot of people get worried that if they're homeschooling, they aren't going to have the change of scenery that you would get, for example, of going from a house to school and back again. And I guess it's a legitimate concern that if you are living in a very small house or an apartment, that you don't have necessarily the change of scenery that you would think you do. But I always encourage people to get kind of creative with their spaces, because I think there's a lot of spaces people forget about when it comes to homeschooling. So for example, yes, we have a small bungalow, but we also have a great front deck. And so we have this little front deck and off of our dining room, and we actually do a lot of homeschooling in our warmer months on the front deck. That's where our kids love to go out there and do math. They love to do puzzles or activities on the front deck, and it just kind of gives us a change of scenery. Same thing with the backyard, another change of scenery. It doesn't not everything has to happen at a dining room table or at a desk. Like we can take our homeschooling anywhere. And that does apply. I know right now, pandemic wise, it's a little bit harder, but you can take your homeschooling and take your workbooks to a coffee shop or a library, or go meet up with another friend who's homeschooling and do your math together there. Like there are different ways to change your scenery without having necessarily to have more space. And sometimes when you're changing your scenery, it's nice to think of places that will offer you things that you can't do in your space. So for example, we're really big fans of going to the park or on hiking trails and finding things to learn about, or finding ways to make our lessons work in those spaces, because it makes it a little bit more authentic. I don't know if that's the right word, but it just feels more natural to learn about painting watercolors when you're outside painting watercolors looking at a tree. You know what I mean? Or it makes more sense to practice your counting when you're counting the rocks that are on the path. It's just a more natural way of learning. And so, I highly encourage you to like explore outdoor spaces around you, explore study locations that you can find, like libraries or even like coffee shops. Our kids love going to the local coffee shop. Stefan takes the kids to the coffee shop, especially a lot last year. He would take them and they would bring Play-Doh and Uno, and they would play like card games to practice their numbers and all that kind of stuff while just being in a coffee shop. It was just a different location and they loved it. They'd sit there, drink their iced tea, and they were happy as larks. So be creative with your different space options that you have, and look beyond your own dining room table for space. Another great tip is, if you have a very limited space, is to limit your materials to things that are going to be well loved, well used, and multi-use. So for example, I know a lot of people love a lot of math programs have lots of manipulatives and lots of pieces, and sometimes those math manipulatives can take up a whole shelf just in themselves, depending on the program. We don't really use those kinds of programs. We like to stick to using manipulatives that we can use for multiple things. So for example, we're big fans of using Lego. Lego is a toy. Lego is a math manipulative. Lego is, it's counters. We can make base 10 blocks with it. We can use it for like building sets. We can make little movies with it. We can do all kinds of like games with it. So Lego to us is far more valuable than, a base 10 set, because we can use it for multiple things and it takes the same amount of space. So think of things like that. What can I use that is going to be worth my time? And what am I going to invest not only my money, but my space in, that is going to be worth it in the long run? So, stick to things like basic arts and craft supplies, markers, pencils, crayons, pencils to obviously write with, pens, paper, glue, scissors. Like that's all you really need. Craft wise, try sticking to things that you're going to use all the time and that your kids are going to use all the time. And be really, like, sometimes you have to be a little ruthless and like cut out the extra. And also when you're doing, like, when you decide to minimize what you're using, it actually ends up saving you a lot of money, because a lot of, like, for example, a math program with lots and lots of extra add-ons and manipulatives tend to be really, really expensive. My kids use Lego anyway, so it was not an extra cost for us. So it's, not only are you saving space, you're saving money too. Then the other thing you do need to do when you are talking about working in a small space is you do need to be a little bit creative when it comes to the space that you're using. So I know a lot of people are worried about, like, where am I going to hang, posters, and where am I going to keep all the kids' stuff, and where am I going to put the map of the world? And those are, like, as a homeschoolers, those are some things that some people really, really worry about. And really want to include in their homeschooling. I know map of the world is a very common thing that a lot of parents want to have their kids exposed to. And so sometimes it just means being creative. So maybe you have it in your hallway instead of your, kitchen or dining room. Maybe you have like things, I love to hang stuff like clotheslines. You can have them in your window or on a wall. You can have them, and that's where you can, hang your kids' artwork instead of having, tons and tons of things everywhere. Look at your walls and your wall space. I think people often discount what they can do with wall space and how that can be so helpful. So for example, if you have kind of an empty wall or a section of a wall, try stringing some string across it and making like a place to hang some artwork, or put up some like shelves or picture ledges. IKEA has really inexpensive picture ledges. We just put a couple in our kids' activity room. They are $15 and that's the cheapest I've ever seen, and they're very long, come in different colors. They're fantastic. And all of a sudden now we have a place to display more books. You can use them for so many different things. Think of your wall space, be creative with it, add shelves, add picture ledges, add strings, and that's a great way to add some more storage to a space. Another thing is think about what you need to keep. Now, depending on where you live, you might have to keep records. Luckily, I live in a place where we don't. Thank you, Ontario. And so I don't really keep records of stuff. We keep a couple of our favorite art pieces. If you do need to keep things, or you want to keep things, consider doing pictures. Like take a picture with your phone or a digital camera and just saving them onto like a cloud, saving them on the cloud or on your computer, and then throwing the actual hard copy out, because obviously digital space doesn't take any room in your house, and it's one less thing that you have to like keep and maintain. So think of like digital options too. I know a lot of people are really getting into like digital books and audiobooks. Those are great. Instead of having a huge library, that you can actually just pull out some great digital books. And a lot of people are using a lot of programs that are available on a computer rather than having tons and tons of textbooks or programs. So digital options can be a great option for people who have very limited space, because obviously all you need is your laptop, right? So consider those things. And then another great thing to think about if you don't have a lot of space is, this goes back to the idea of, you need the three things: place to keep the kids' stuff, your stuff, the kids' stuff, and your materials. So we've talked about materials a little bit. A great thing for kids is to have their own thing. So whether it is a bin, a tote, a basket, for us it's a shelf. We have a shelf in one of our Calyx units. That is where their stuff goes. That's where their workbooks go. That's where their manipulatives or whatever they need for their workbooks go. So for example, Alexi has like her clock that she's made, because we're learning about time. That goes in her shelf. That's where her clock goes. That's where her like tens, her counting chart goes, her workbooks. They all go in the cubby on that shelf. And that is her stuff. Like that is when it's time to, when we're done doing our workbooks, that's where it goes. And it just keeps everything contained. And I think that's the whole point, is if they have something or a place where their stuff goes, you can put their stuff, they can put their stuff in there, but also you can add in their things that you want them to use or work with. And I think that is a really important thing. So if you can find a way to contain their things to their stuff, that is very helpful. And I recommend having it for each kid. I know some people really like magazine folders. Those never worked for us. We do have a couple, but my kids they just didn't work. So like I said, we were more of a shelf or a bin kind of family. I know some people who they have like little like tote bags, or whatever works for you, but having a way that each kid has their own space and their own stuff in one contained unit, I think is really important, especially if you are working on a limited space. It just helps keep everything together. And then lastly, the big thing that happens when you have a small space is you need to keep it tidy. Small tidy spaces will look bigger and feel bigger than a big space that is messy. And so I think that is really one of the most important things you can do, is if you have a very small space, is try to keep it as tidy as possible. We just did a video on this, all about some tips and tricks that we've learned as homeschoolers and how to deal with the homeschool mess. You can find that. We'll link it up here. But try to keep your small space tidy. I know it's easier said than done, but it does make a big difference when you're homeschooling and when you don't have a lot of extra room. If you like this video and like the kind of stuff that we put out, consider subscribing and click the bell. That way you can get notifications when we put out new videos, which we do pretty much every Monday morning. And make sure you follow us on Facebook and Instagram. That is where we put all of our tips, tricks, activities, field trips, all the things that we're doing with our kids, that's where we put them so you guys can be inspired there. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.